Yeah, so this is actually, yeah, like he said, the story of a big rewrite, which not everybody thinks is a good idea. Joel Spolsky, whom you might know, like it's the company behind Trello and Stack Overflow, called it the single worst mistake you can make. But of course, context matters here, and he's talking about the Netscape 6 rewrite, like millions of lines of C++ code. And I'm talking about our product Nextjournal, which was just a couple of months old when we started considering Clojure. And to give you an idea of what this is a computational notebook, which means it's a notebook interface where you can combine code, data, and prose to get these computational documents. And what is different about Nextjournal is we try to make this fully reproducible, which means like we version everything like from the document you see on the surface to any data you upload or generate to the like computational environments as Docker images that are running, executing the code behind those cells. And there's like three main components to it. There's the editor, which you've just seen, which is this like single page application that's at the front. Then there's a website, which is just some basic stuff like user management. And then you have these profiles where articles are displayed, or notebooks. And then you have the runner, which is a backend service that executes the code in these different languages. And on the team, we were 5 people when we started to work on this. We've been working together for quite a while, doing mostly card games. So we did web apps in Ruby on Rails and later Phoenix, game servers starting out in Java and later Erlang and Elixir. Mobile apps in Objective-C, Swift, and also Java, and web apps in JavaScript, ClojureScript, and Elm. And starting out, Elm and Elixir were actually our favorite languages, so that's what we decided to use initially. Now, who here has some experience with Elm? All right, and Elixir? All right. Yeah, so on Elm, like, I highly recommend playing with it. I think it's a delightful language. There's the saying in the Elm community, if it compiles, it runs. And I can attest to that being true. And the first time you experience it, it's really quite magical. There's also Elm format, which is a canonical formatter for Elm, which, yeah, is just a pleasure to use. You can like just spit your code at your editor, and then like whenever you save it, it comes out nicely formatted, and this is widely adopted within the community, which just removes a lot of friction. The error messages are really great in Elm, and I think this has now influenced like and is trickling down into more communities. And also Evan, the creator of Elm, he places an emphasis on what he calls gradual learning. Introducing concepts just and complicated language just when you need it, which overall just makes for a really great getting started experience. But it doesn't come without trade-offs. So Elm is a very pure language which enables these guarantees. If it compiles, it runs. On the downside, like integration with existing JavaScript libraries is really quite a pain. So you have to like talk to these libraries as if they're like an external server that you communicate with via a JSON API. And then in Elm land, you have, again, those nice guarantees. And for us, very, very early in the project, we decided like we had to integrate quite a few of those libraries, like CodeMore for the code editing, a rich text editor that does the content editable stuff, and just more domain-specific libraries like molecule viewer and stuff. And this was going to be too cumbersome. Then also, like Elm was undergoing some major breaking changes at the time. This was the Elm 17 release, which when we started out like almost 3 years ago, did away with a major part of Elm, like the signal graph. And these were some changes that were definitely quite disruptive to the whole ecosystem. Like it takes a while for all libraries to catch up and be compatible with that. So yeah, we decided it wasn't going to be like great to be in such a position of having such disruptive changes like in a yearly or bi-yearly basis. So for a while we actually decided to go back to JavaScript. There's this scientific framework for scientific writing that we decided to use that could be a really, like we thought could be a really good fit. But especially coming from Elm, like where a lot of things are, like it's clear how you use the language, and like the core library comes with a lot of good stuff, and it's like there's a pretty fixed path for how you do something in Elm. Like with JavaScript, this definitely wasn't the case, and we were just struggling a lot with tooling and like library churn. But most of all, we realized coming from Elm that we actually like didn't want to go back to a framework or language that defaults to mutability. Like for example, like when you Elm is very strict again. Like when you have a bug or like Elm dictates a single place to store all your state, which means like you can just take that state and send it over the wire, and you can reproduce exactly what a user is seeing. And this in JavaScript, especially when you use libraries that aren't built like this, which you need to do extra effort, this just is a lot more difficult. And so we were starting to look around for languages that compile to JavaScript, but are like in the middle ground that make integration with existing libraries easier. But do favor immutability. And like ClojureScript had been on our radar as I met Matt at Curryon 2016. I highly recommend you to check this out. This is his work. When I sit down at my editor, I feel relaxed, which I don't. And this has really put Clojure on our radar, even though like I had dismissed it before, because the syntax just looked too foreign to me. And but seeing what Matt had accomplished there single-handedly really made me take another look. In some ways, he had already built like a lot of what we wanted Nextjournal to become. But I'd later learned that it's a lot more difficult or it still adds a lot of complexity if you want to do the same stuff for multiple languages, and not everything can be applied there as nicely. But so we decided to like actually play with this a bit more and do like a prototype. There we constrained ourselves to 2 weeks. We used Reframe, which is pretty similar to the Elm architecture, and we had one of the freelancers that worked for us had some previous ClojureScript experience, so I was mostly pairing with him, and we really liked it and decided to stick with it. So we decided to make it our team's focus to migrate the editor over to ClojureScript. And so to do this, we used Transit to communicate with our Elixir backend. We used a Node.js app for server-side rendering. And so it worked mostly well. What didn't work well, we had a fair bit of struggle with tooling. Like we started out with lining in, and then like had some problems, decided to, like we thought boot might solve them for us, but it didn't. I think this was mainly because of our inexperience with the ecosystem, but it's also a trade-off of like, yeah, having these different choices and the paths not being like, or there not being as much usage as, and like this, yeah, whole frameworks versus libraries approach, which I'll go into more a bit later. But yeah, overall we're definitely pretty happy with it. So how did we introduce Clojure? We did it incrementally, starting out with just the editor, just taking a small part. Like our fear of parents turned out to be not an issue at all. I should have used par-edit, or I should have used par-infer. Like I struggled with par-edit initially. Would definitely be my recommendation to try par-infer first, and maybe switch to structural editing later. And also, like, yeah, there's in the Ruby community there is a lot of JVM bashing going on, and you definitely shouldn't believe those myths. Like, yeah, there's a different workflow you adapt in Clojure, but the startup time actually isn't nearly as big a deal as we would have thought. And so, yeah, the more we learned about Clojure, mainly from this guy, Clojure and the concepts behind it, this is the value of values, where Rich talks about the principles behind Datomic. The more we got an urge to use Datomic as our database, we thought it could be a great fit because of its focus on immutability. Like not worrying about losing information ever, I think is a nice property for a lot of systems, but like for us at Nextjournal with the focus on reproducibility, this is especially true. And it didn't seem sensible to integrate it with Elixir because Datomic really shines from this peer model, like where you can like use Clojure as a language to do your sorting and data manipulation and stuff. So just bringing in Datomic with the client library and integrating that with Elixir, we thought we'd lose a lot of the benefits that it brings. So we actually decided to also, that using Datomic meant bringing the whole website over to Clojure as well. And just to remind you, so this is the component like which handles the user management and login, and then gets you to these articles or notebooks. And yeah, getting off the ground was definitely frustrating with Pedestal. Like comparing that to like how you'd get started in Rails or Phoenix. Like you spent like the first 2 weeks we hardly got anything done, just struggling with logging and XML logging APIs. Like you bring in the Datomic dependency and then this gets you a no-op logger, which means your logging just breaks. And yeah, I think this is partly because there's not as much usage of each of those libraries in Clojure, but it also comes down to the framework versus libraries approach, which means like once you've settled on a library to use like Pedestal, you still gotta decide like what do you use as a component library. Do I use mount, integrant, or component? And there's just a ton of choices you have to make, which I found to be pretty stressful as someone coming new into the ecosystem, like having a lot of incomplete information on what the best choice there is. Now looking back, I think I now appreciate that you can actually make those changes, like that those choices aren't as final as they are in other frameworks. like, yeah, you can also undo one of those much easier than you can like when you settle on Rails or some monolithic framework. Also, like, and this is especially true coming from Elixir, like concurrency is definitely a lot harder in Clojure, like using core async, than it is with Elixir. Like, for example, this recommendation of not doing I/O in Go blocks, and then the question is like, what exactly is I/O? Are like database reads okay if you do them in Datomic, because this is cached locally, or you have to start a thread for everything, and is logging okay or not? And this is, yeah, something we still struggle with to get exactly right. But overall, we were able to complete this migration in 3 months. And definitely love Datomic. I think it's one of the most beautiful piece of software I've ever used. Like the way it's built out of just these very simple abstractions and this beautiful information model, allowing you to talk to your database like it was just a big hash map in memory, is definitely mind-blowing. And the transaction format, I think, is really great. So I can highly recommend to give that a try. Next up, we did like some incremental improvements and worked on really improving our tooling and feedback cycles. And like, I think this, yeah, like I said, we had been struggling before, like going from lining into boot and back. And the two main changes we made, like first we switched over to tool steps, which gave us just a simpler setup that we could understand better, and we invested a lot of time in making this like work really well and making it easy for developers to get their REPLs connected. So when you boot the system, we automatically connect both ClojureScript and Clojure REPL, and got rid of a lot of friction there, which I think if you have this in there, then a lot of people like often like don't use the REPL, and which you really should try to avoid. Like especially if you're coming from, yeah, if you haven't learned the value of this REPL-driven development and live programming workflow yet, yeah, you tend to easily forget about it. And also, yeah, we switched to Figwheel main, and I especially want to highlight like this extra mains feature that Figwheel introduced, which allows you to have multiple main namespaces in the same compilation process, which for us like allowed us to get down from like 6 targets into 2, just a separate Node.js target, and all the other targets like def cards and different namespaces we had, we were able to compile and like combine into one process, and yeah, this improved our feedback cycles like 3 times. And also what we did, does this play? We made it opt-in to also work on ClojureScript from the REPL, which means turning off live reloading and instead opting into this evaluating forms or evaluating stuff on a perform basis. Like what you see at the top there is just a normal live reloading, which means it takes like 5 seconds. This is on a pretty slow machine to see the effects of a change, whereas at the bottom you just evaluate this one form, and then we have a hook that remounts the app, and you see the change instantly. So yeah, why did we switch to Clojure? We got this incredible platform reach, being able to reach the whole NPM ecosystem, as well as the whole JVM ecosystem, like the feedback loops, like once we had been able to like get the whole team to adopt this live programming workflow, which definitely was a lot of work. But I think now we're able to be more productive than we've ever been, thanks to those fast feedback loops. And also stability, like when you work on this for over the course of, like, it doesn't really matter when you're playing with something on a weekend, but when you're working with something over the course of a couple of years, you really appreciate how you're able to upgrade major versions with hardly doing any work. Like I think, yeah, we've upgraded 2 major Clojure versions, and it's been less than a day of work each time. So yeah, being this productive, we also got the desire to like get rid of our last component, the runner, which had still been running on Elixir at the time. And we thought to remind you, this is the service that takes care of this code execution in those different languages. And we thought we'd get a much simpler stack and dev setup, being able to get rid of one runtime completely, having one language within the team, like no distinction between a front-end and a back-end developer, and everybody being able to read each other's code is, I think, a huge benefit. And now this point, not being able to opt out of Erlang's share nothing memory model, I think this is a bit special for us, as it can be a problem like you can't really do like data transformation really efficiently in Erlang this way, and the VM just isn't good for number crunching. But yeah, this might not apply to everybody, but for us, this definitely was a nice thing. Also, the library ecosystem, like, yeah, we've really started to appreciate this. Like, there's just a ton of stuff we're using, like, in Apache Commons, and also, like, yeah, a library for Docker, which we, yeah, had just, like, done with manual HTTP calls in Elixir before. And it's just, yeah, nice to be able to use this stuff. Also, like, the more we understood it, we've really gotten to love Pedestal's interceptor model, and we also used it in the runner outside of an HTTP context to execute code. And we use this to separate the side effects from the planning stage. So this means, like, when we get a request to execute code, we look at like what's the current state of the system and decide, like, is this the first request that, like, does this need to pull a Docker image and boot a runtime, and like, do any dependent cells have to execute as a result of this? And yeah, by separating out this planning stage from the actual side effects that happens, we can test this really nicely, and then the actual effects that are performed just need to be tested in isolation and run once. So yeah, like with the Clojure experience we had at the time, like doing this final migration wasn't that big a deal. We were able to pull this off within 2 months. And yeah, I think we really got all the benefits that we had hoped for. So why do I think this worked for us? And I think it's worked great for us, where Joel says it's like the worst thing you can do. I think it's because, like, first of all, this was definitely really limited in scope as opposed to what Joel is talking about. So I think this, yeah, is really 2 completely different things you can't compare. Also, like, we did a platform switch, so this wasn't a rewrite from C++ to C++, where I would agree it's great to do a refactoring and do those changes incrementally. But yeah, we switched to a different platform, and that just has different properties we thought would be great for us. Also, yeah, all our team members were still around, so this wasn't a legacy project where everybody had abandoned ship and taking all their knowledge with them. And lastly, like, we definitely learned so much from making the switch. Like, yeah, being able to, like, I don't know why I never had watched those Rich Hickey videos before I was a part of the Clojure community, but I wasn't really aware of them. And yeah, I think there was just a ton of stuff we've learned from it, so it's been really great. Right, thank you.
Thank you. So we have about 5 to 7 minutes left. Are there any questions?
Thank you. I'm just curious to hear if you miss anything from the Elm or Elixir experiences that you had before. Anything that has not improved in this whole?
Yeah, I think like definitely from the Elm experience, there's sometimes this thing, yeah, where you have a bug when you deploy your thing, and you think, yeah, this definitely would have, like the compiler would have caught that. But yeah, it's also this trade-off, like in Elm, then when you like do a major refactoring of your model, and then you can't like get the system to compile for 2 days. Yeah, I mean, so there is these different trade-offs, I think. And on Elixir, like, yeah, I think the concurrency stuff is. I'm sometimes wondering if, like in Elixir, you can't do one thing in one process that locks up your whole system, right? So you just have this managed execution. And yeah, I'm sometimes wondering if this isn't like a trade-off we should be able to opt in the JVM as well, like get slower execution in turn for like being able to build this more reliable system. Like the way, yeah, core async runs with like this fixed amount of 8 threads or whatever you set it to. And yeah, them being able to lock up pretty easily is definitely something that's bitten us.
So Elm is kind of a language and a framework combined in one place. You mentioned moving to ClojureScript, which gets you the language. Have you written the rest yourself, or did you use Elm or Fortran or one of the frameworks within that?
Within Elm?
On the ClojureScript side.
What we used as a framework, or? Yeah, we used Reframe, yeah, on the ClojureScript side, yeah. And
did you evaluate the others?
Yeah, I mean, this was also, like, this is just pretty stressful coming into the ecosystem, like you, yeah. I think for a beginner, it's really nice to just have this one thing you go to, and yeah, then you start to learn Reframe, and then, oh, I've got to rewrite this to Elm. Yeah, so we definitely like looked at all those things, but yeah, you also gotta resist the urge sometimes to, like, yeah, I'm happy we didn't really rewrite or port this to Elm at one point, which, yeah, now doesn't seem to be used as much anymore. And also, like, yeah, there's some, or like we wanted to use other stuff often like you think this might be a better fit, but also like we had been able to, like, so far fix any performance problems we had with Reframe by, yeah, just keeping using it, and in the end, it's not this important, I think.
Thank you.
Maybe one last question. Or maybe not. Jetzt kommst du die Frage.
Thank you. Is it open source, Nextjournal?
No, that's something we're still trying to figure out, like, yeah, what to open source or, no, it's not, but yeah, if you want to take a look, I'm happy to add people on GitHub, like, there's currently still, like, secrets in the repository and stuff, so we can't really make it public, but yeah, we do eventually want to do that.
Thank you, Martin.
Thanks. Bitte?